don't go too far.
So at this time, I'd like to invite Lynn back, Kate back, as well as Bob Fernandez and Ken Kobus for a question and answer period from the audience. They're coming, they're coming. All right.
I'm here again with some questions that came in from our participants that are transporting in by electrons. And so there's a time lag for them. And so I will ask the questions of this panel, but also it may be necessary from a previous panel for some of you to help answer these questions. Do I understand correctly that IATA guidelines do require a rodent shipping container to have viewing window? If so, how can covering of the viewing window by airline paperwork be avoided? This is from one of our university colleagues. Use really small type, would that be?
So there are places on containers to put the paperwork. You don't have to put it over the viewing window. You've seen some examples of shipping containers for rodents, and there are other shipping containers that will be illustrated. There's no need to cover the viewing windows. And in some cases, there are multiple viewing windows on a single container, so that shouldn't be a problem.
Bill, you might want to stay right there.
I'll just add that not all rodent shipping containers have viewing windows. The majority do, because the majority of them are SPF. And the idea, of course, of the viewing window is because filters are placed over the ventilation openings, which obscures the ability to observe the animals. So if you had a conventional animal inside a container, you would not necessarily have to have a viewing window because you could look through the ventilation openings.
We are a commercial breeder that ships 98% by ground through the U.S. and Canada, and have found this to be the most cost-effective and safe transport method for the animals. And judging by the source of this, I think they're referring to rodents. Where did Bill White get his information of shipping ground versus air?
So if you're a commercial breeder, you ought to talk to some folks in your organization, because that information came from the 4 largest commercial breeders in North America. So if you really need to know, we can tell you, but it was also presented in ILAR transportation. I don't know what I would call it, but it was a workshop a number of years ago. We collected it specifically for that purpose, so that we can give some idea of what failure rates are, because that is really hard to get out of any other source. And so and again, please keep in mind that that is all failure causes while shipping. And a failure cause may be it's the wrong sex of animals in one container. There are 20 containers, therefore there were 20 failures, not one failure. So again, it has to do with all causes. And I just tried to split that out to show you that overall transportation failures aren't that high. And secondly, there's not a lot of difference between ground and air.
How do we resolve the issue of shipping lab animals via commercial airlines, given the lapses in temperature and environmental control that routinely occur during handoffs, loading, unloading, and storage? As I believe that these excursions are outside the allowable range of exposure and for a significant amount of time based on the animal guide. How do Covance and Charles River handle this?
Well, I think the significant operating word there is believe. We do, in fact, track what goes on. And in fact, we do put very tiny temperature monitors that are about the size of a credit card that do a 720 measurements over the span of time you choose. So we do, in fact, look at load temperature excursions in not only air but in ground. Again, this is information that you then go back to see what the causes of any temperature excursion is, and we look at the length of time. Okay, so that's how we kind of judge the practices of those who we charge the carriage of the animals to. And we also look at conditions, complaints, or problems. So we track every single complaint, and we go back and try to examine what happened during that. And in some cases, we'll put 200 or 300 temperature monitors in a single vehicle to essentially do a thermal mapping of the entire vehicle during transit. So there are a lot of things that go on commercially, but you need to understand that a lot of people are making assumptions of what goes on. For the most part, temperature excursions are not very long, and they're not really great. And stay tuned for the rodent piece. We'll show you some other issues, okay?
I would add that we do a lot of pre-planning at Charles River in terms of looking at weather forecasts to avoid the extreme temperatures, and that would potentially involve rerouting the shipment to a different airport that we maybe would fly out of that has a more favorable weather condition, or we would delay the shipment so that the animals wouldn't be subjected to the extremes.
So I can just speak for comments, and I certainly would invite Greg to add his comments as well. But we use the temperature recorders extensively in our shipments, and it's actually pretty surprising how stable the temperature is, especially on the interior of a pallet of crates, even when the outside temperature may be one extreme or the other. There's other ways of mitigating things like wind and extremely cold temperatures by temporarily covering the entire group of crates that are on a pallet with a blanket. It doesn't really seriously impact ventilation, but it does act as another layer of warmth for the animals in the short time between the time they get off of an airplane and into a environmentally conditioned warehouse or into an environmentally conditioned ground vehicle. So there, Greg, can you think of any other points that? The other thing I think was made was just on the planning and having enough people available to move those animals out into the raw temperature weather from plane into warehouse or plane into truck, having enough people, having them well trained, and having almost a seamless operation. It's that we found that to be extremely important.
Well, thanks to both panels for working together and helping us to learn how to include our colleagues who are not in the room with us.
Thanks so much. At this time, I'd invite any of our audience members here in DC to step up to the microphone and ask any further questions of these panels. Oh, good, Bill. I was just going to extend coffee break, but okay.
So, Kate, does everybody have the same exclusion list?
I guess I forgot
Can you talk
something.
about what exclusion lists are, maybe?
Yeah. So that's one of the other risks in transport is the exclusion lists. Exclusion lists differ between different facilities, and the information provided as a health report may not actually be a health report. It may be 65 pages of raw laboratory data from every facility on that campus. So one of the things that I've been working on, and as part of a joint ALAS-FALASA working group, the co-conveners are myself and Jan Bos Prince from Leiden University, is coming up with a standardized health report for laboratory mice and rats. So it's certainly not going to be any sort of mandatory use document, but we're looking for a way to not standardize exclusion lists, because exclusion lists should be relevant to the facility and the work that's being performed at that facility. But when you ship animals to a colleague, they shouldn't have to look down and, compare it to their list. And if there's a standard list and you monitor or you don't, then at least you know what they don't monitor for, and you can decide to take that risk, or you can say, yeah, we don't monitor for this either. We don't care. Great, let's take the animals. So that's what we've been working on, and it's very close to publication. So again, not standardizing the exclusion list, but standardizing the reporting of the health results that people have.
Ms. Silk?
Are herpes B virus positive monkeys considered dangerous goods by the IATA? How do you deal with these, or are they just not declared?
Dr. Simmons?
I don't believe so. I think it's simply not declared. B virus is a neurotropic herpes virus. B virus is I think it's an issue that it's simply not declared. B virus is a simplex herpes virus in macaques. It's part of their normal flora. Not dangerous to them really in any way. And B virus is really not meaningfully different than herpes simplex virus in humans. So the herpes simplex in humans is just as dangerous to the mice and rabbits and other animals that are being transported.
Thank you. Could Mr. Fernandez elaborate on the temperature ranges he referred to that were different than the 45 to 85 degree holding area limits set by the USDA? What is the range he uses and why?
We typically use a narrower range. Our target range, for example, a truckload of rodents in SPF filtered cartons would be approximately 55 to 60. That would be the target range, because we're shooting for a temperature range inside the crate, inside the worst position crate in the entire load, between 65 and 70 at the animal skin surface.
So you're referring to the ambient temperature outside?
No, I'm referring to the controlled temperature inside the cargo area.
Inside the cargo area, yes.
So we would maintain that at between 55 and 60 to achieve a temperature inside the carton at the animal skin surface of 65 to 70. So that's why we would go for a lower range, because if you were at the high end of the USDA range, let's say 85, which is legal, but you'd probably see a temperature inside the carton of 95, and you would see heat stress as a result.
Very good clarification, thank you. Any suggestions for planning for a primate that becomes ill during a shipment, since there is no veterinarian accompanying the shipment?
So,
I'll take a shot at it.
Okay.
No,
we're fighting over answers.
I don't think it's correct to say that there's no veterinarian. So very often on charter flights or with large shipments, there are veterinarians that accompany the shipment over. On trucking routes, normally they're very experienced non-human primate technicians that are caring for the animals during the shipment, and they're in constant communication. So for example, when I was at Charles River, we had them call in every 4 hours. So at their 4-hour check, they had to call in and let us know how things were going. If there was an issue, they would call us and let us know. I don't think that we ever got to a situation where we needed veterinary care on while a shipment was en route, but we had a plan to call local veterinarians. So there's a network of laboratory animal veterinarians that can provide assistance along routes. So there is veterinary access to veterinary care available.
So you're saying good planning and telemedicine?
Yes. What we'll learn in my talk on non-human primates is planning, 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 and planning.
And more planning after that.
And I'll just comment that Covines likewise has veterinarians accompany some shipments. And the thing is that once they're in the cargo hold during transit, it's almost impossible to access that area. So we may have veterinarians on the ground at any stopover points, or access to veterinarians at those stopover points, and there's always the telephone, just as Charles River does.
And Carl and Greg, you can correct this if I'm wrong, but for other species, I think airlines are required to have a veterinarian available on call for those other species. Those would be mostly pets, but is that still correct? Yeah.
Hi, I have a quick question for Dr. Anderson. You had mentioned the midterm pregnant females. Is there a point at which you would recommend that you would say we're not going to ship pregnant females, such as based on length of time or something, or do you use any kind of criteria for when you maybe wouldn't ship pregnant animals?
Typically during the third trimester, because you could end up, either having
Right.
abortions, or if they, are very late and they actually have the babies during transit, then they may cannibalize them, or there's not enough space, and so they are injured and so forth.
But even
So-
midterm animals, you wouldn't put a restriction on, or does anybody ever take into consideration even midterm pregnant animals perhaps shouldn't be shipped based on length of time of the trip, or?
I think it depends on a lot of other factors: length of the trip, the condition of the mother, the age of the mother, whether she's an experienced mother. Typically, there's not a lot of reason for doing that. To be honest with you,
Right.
I can't think of any occasions when we've been even asked to do that. So, in larger animals, it's really more with possibly rodents or rabbits, time-mated rabbits.
Thanks.
Any other questions for these panels? All right. So hearing none, we're going to adjourn for a coffee break. And the program is allowing for a 15-minute coffee break. We're a little ahead of schedule. Why don't we plan to reconvene at 2:35?